that nations weaken not because of their past, but rather by how they are taught it. And for 70 years, we have been taught to airbrush our history, taught to forget historical injustices, from Somnath to Kashi Vishwanath, from Babarpur to Bakhtiarpur, from Allahabad to Aurangabad. These injustices have somehow deliberately been made visible, as though to lionize the debasement, to celebrate the humiliation. Why? We know more about the Mughals than about Shivaji and Rana Pratap and Prithviraj Chauhan. Why? Because history written by the victors is peddled by the vanquished. And we have been thoroughly vanquished. We have to accept it. This is a country where people still go and pray at the grave of the monster Aurangzeb, who beheaded Guru Tegh Bahadur, who decapitated Sambhaji Maharaj, who demolished Kashi Vishwanath, and who murdered 4.6 million Hindus. This is a country where Guru Arjan Dev was forced to sit on a hot plate and literally cooked alive by the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. And what do? We immortalize Jahangir in our films as that affable, feather-toying romantic Salim. This is a country where a celebrated historian, or so-called historian, Ram Guha, did not want Delhi roads to be named after Chhatrapati Shivaji, the man who birthed an empire stretching all the way from Peshawar to Plassey. Because in Guha's words, the man was, and I quote him now, little-known regional figure and a feudal lord who endorsed caste hierarchies, unquote. This is the country where Kareena Kapoor and Saif Ali Khan take pride in naming their son Taimur, where Akhilesh Yadav takes pride in having the nickname Tipu or Tipu Sultan, the same Tipu Sultan who wrote a manifesto that was a terrifying proclamation calling for all Muslims to come together to convert infidels and wage jihad. But I'm running ahead of myself a little here. The topic of today actually intrigues me. Forget rescuing. Forget even distorting. What in the first place do we mean by history? You see, as a scientist, the time scale that interests me is not 100 or 500 or 1,000 years, but 1 billion or 5 billion or 10 billion years. Or even as the recent incredible James Webb Telescope images have unveiled for us, 13.5 billion years. And on this time scale, I'm not Indian, I'm Ethiopian. I'm not the descendant of a Ranganathan, but of AL2881 or Lucy. And I'm not a creation of design, but of a conspiracy hatched by thunder and lightning and water and ammonia and hydrogen and methane and dust. Let religion and its mesmerizing literature not fool you into believing you were created by someone who wasn't a product of the RNA world. The combined efforts of the human imagination have endowed intergalactic aliens with 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 nose, 4 limbs, and 1 brain. Yes, we think evolution peaked with us, and that an alien worthy of being our adversary has to look and think like us. Of course it does. After all, we are the masters of the universe. We sit atop the tree of life, and all what we survey from that vantage is beneath us, crawling and writhing and inept and unintelligent and wanting to be us. Nothing could be further away from truth. We, the people, are but a bunch of living and breathing cells. That's all. We don't sit atop the tree of life. We barely manage to hang on to one of its 100-odd branches. We are a cog in this giant throbbing machine called evolution. Only a cog, a small cog. The modern tree of life is humbling to stare at. It tells us that we are just one of the millions of animals in an animal farm. Such an idea was blasphemous barely a century ago. Imagine telling all those continent-conquering SOBs that their bodies had more bacteria than human cells, that bugs complete us, that humans survive only because of an exquisite friendship we have struck with the rest of the living beings, that no one is Napoleon in this animal farm. And so nothing really matters, whether our ancestors were brilliant or not, whether our culture is ancient or not, whether our religions are better or not. We are but an inconsequential bunch of cells, as I said. Then why does history matter? It matters because, like science, it has to be built on an edifice of observation and brute facts. Because the correct understanding of it strengthens us, helps us survive. With a slight difference. Scientists like the black and white, historians love the gray. This grey has given mankind only misery. It is because of the grey that there are people who still believe in religious books or in Mao and Hitler and Tipu and Godse and Churchill and Rhodes and Aurangzeb and hundreds more who have committed awful crimes, but the believers of grey have forgiven them because they also did some good. Grey is social Darwinism gone berserk. Grey has birthed cruel empires, and believers of the grey have fettered them. Worse, our history has been written by those who believe in the grey. When I said earlier that these injustices have deliberately been made visible, as though to lionize the debasement, celebrate the humiliation, the irony is that the same people who have taught us this, drilled this self-loathing in us, these same people, men and women of grey, they want others to fight historical injustices around the world. They condemn barbarians of the West hitherto worshipped, like the Confederacy generals, Rhodes, Churchill, Pizarro, Murray, Colston, Leopold. They celebrate their roads and buildings being renamed, their statues being brought down. But here in India, this same lot eulogizes Tipu, Aurangzeb, Babur, Khilji. They celebrate the destruction of Kashi, Mathura, Ayodhya, Martand. Why? To me, the mark of civilization is this unquenchable thirst to demand justice for your ancestors, to correct a historical wrong. For that exemplifies a continuity, an idea, a memory that can never be erased, that is worth fighting and preserving for. It makes justice greater than the sum of its parts. And that is why civilizations are not fleeting like empires. That is why history is a medicine. Catharsis is a cure. If an image could speak 1,000,000 words, it would be that of the Gyan Vyapi mosque built atop Kashi Vishwanath, demolished by Aurangzeb. If orphaned stones could speak and not just weep, the stories they would tell of Mathura idols being used as stepping stones in a mosque. Why shouldn't Mathura and Kashi be washed of the sins the tyrants committed on it? But the Supreme Court has willfully ratified the Places of Worship Act that obligates maintaining all religious places as they were on August 15, 1947. In a just world, our Parliament and our Supreme Court wouldn't have done this. But they have. Why? Because we are fearful of learning our true history. It scares us, that's why. And that is why to redress and rescue India from distorted history is important. Hindu gods and their idols are as dirty as they are ugly and horrible to look at. And witnessing the destruction of temple idols gives me so much joy, unquote. The person who said this was also the chief architect of the Goa Inquisition that led to the conversion, torture, and murder of countless Hindus. His name was Saint Xavier. Even our Hindu nationalist Prime Minister Narendra Modi venerates him. This is why we need to rescue our history. There are hundreds, possibly thousands of historical examples, but just one would suffice for the paucity of time: Tipu Sultan. Read his manifesto, written in his own words. As I said, it is a terrifying proclamation calling for all Muslims to come together to wage jihad. Annihilation of the infidels is a sacred duty, he writes. Annihilation. The Hindus of Coorg suffered a particularly brutal onslaught. Murders, tortures, forced conversions. Even dead Hindus were converted by Tipu Sultan, even dead Hindus. He destroyed 800 temples, 27 churches, captured 60,000 Christians, converted 30,000, killed thousands, and yet we call him a symbol of communal harmony. We have Doordarshan national shows on it. We cheer when an Indian purchases the Tipu sword. We cheer when the statue of the evil racist King Leopold of Belgium is demolished in Belgium. But we celebrate Tipu Jayanti because tyrants who murder Hindus are not tyrants, they are heroes. That is why it is important to redress this balance. From the Aryans to Aurangzeb, from Saint Xavier to Shivaji, our historians have chosen what to hide, what to invent, and what to disclose. The singular reason for this is this craving for patronage of an ideology, a government, an ecosystem, or a clique. And once our historians are done with their contortions, we, the readers, sit back and enjoy the inevitable fallout, the outing of hypocrisy. The left outs the hypocrisy of the right, and the right outs the hypocrisy of the left. And great column yards are churned out as a result of such skirmishes. But we forget, outing of hypocrisy is a virtue so long as it doesn't turn one into a hypocrite. Well, it does every single time. Villains are made into heroes and heroes into villains. We like it this way. Gandhi, Nehru, Savarkar, Patel, they are to be worshipped. They are to be made into gods, into atlases who carry the weight of our ideologies and our biases on the nape of their necks. History as myth, myth as history. It conforms to what we really are, unsure of our present, fearful of our future. The right wing doesn't want to hear anything about Savarkar that might put him in bad light. The left wing doesn't want to hear anything about Nehru that might put them in bad light. And the so-called Velco historians, as I call them, they don't want to write anything about anyone that might put them in solitary confinement away from all light. Fear and trembling, that is what this is. And the whole nation chugs along on this dead yet simmering coal, a journey to nowhere, slow, halting, tiring, until you realize what the grand plan always is, to appropriate. How else do we explain appropriating foreign destructive ideologies and their proponents, like Karl Marx, Mao, Che Guevara? Do you now understand how reading a particular history can weaken a nation? Because when you eulogize these monsters like Che and Mao and Pol Pot, you also decide to walk on their paths. You weaken the nation. Do I really need to elaborate on this? Look at what the communists did to Bengal. Look at what they did to anything they have touched. And I'm from JNU, so please pardon me on that. Harshad was asking me, by the way, do you stay in the campus? I said, no, there's a huge waiting list for houses. First all the communists have to die, and then only we get a chance to. They destroy anything they touch. And they still they venerate Stalin and Mao, despite knowing everything about these monsters. Mao, who killed 63 million of his own people, 45 million in 4 years flat. And if you think I'm talking abstract and philosophical gobbledygook, recall who wanted to scuttle the Indo-US nuclear deal, who was against the Green Revolution, against river linking, against dams. Recall who forbade the setting up of blood donation camps during the 1962 war with China, who castigated a fellow communist, Achyutanandan, for setting up a blood donation camp. Recall who hailed the Tiananmen Square massacre that killed 10,054 innocents. Recall who was against the liberalization. These people and their political parties are still among us, in our society, in our committees, in our universities, in our parliament. The more we are ignorant of our history, the more we are taught it wrongly. And the more these people come to power. Let me now delve into the contemporary aspect of history. Here, I will deal with the so-called modern Indian history and up to even say yesterday, so that it is history only technically, in so much that it speaks of a time past, but in effect it is the present. And here I put to you that the damage we have done in teaching this aspect of our history, in expounding on the various narratives of it, the damage is much more. In fact, the damage is catastrophic, because it is shaping not only the next generation, but also the present one. History is an account, but it becomes a weapon if it is relevant in a contemporary setting. And it has been weaponized by the Congress and the left to a tremendous effect. And to an extent, that has weakened the nation. I will illustrate this with examples because that is the best way to explain what I mean. Let me begin with Mahatma Gandhi, the man who more than anyone denied us the truth, denied us the ability to be critical of the people and the things he loved, denied us the courage to be critical of religion, denied us catharsis itself. And let me issue my criticism of the Mahatma by employing a Brahmastra in the shape of a man who the Mahatma feared most above anyone else, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Nations aren't inspired through sharing ancestral genes. They aren't shown the righteous path through gene pool commandments. Nations need purity of the mind more than that of the heart. Nations need catharsis. Our nation hasn't had this catharsis. This is because we chose to follow the grey and not the black and white. We chose to follow the road traversed by Mahatma and not Ambedkar. To put it bluntly, Mahatma Gandhi was a man of grey, Ambedkar of black and white. And history shows that men who prefer the black and white are hated by all. Because let us be honest here, this world runs on grey. Grey allows to wash our sins after we have committed them. It allows us to be forgiven. Grey allows us to worship and be worshipped. Grey is actually religion. Gandhi was not a liberal. His beliefs on societal structure, on economy, on a concept state, on what Indians should eat or drink, would make even the most ardent of conservatives blush. His theories were based less on logic and more on a bizarre sense of faith-based entitlement. They can only be described as an inseparable emulsion of homeopathy and spirituality. Gandhi was an intelligent and cunning God-man. He was made for India. He held her pulse, pumped her heart. Ambedkar, on the other hand, was the only true liberal this nation has produced in the last many centuries. Gandhi was a theologian, pretending to be a politician. Ambedkar, a supreme scholar. Gandhi was a social Darwinian. Ambedkar, a Darwinian. Gandhi said he would not, quote, weep over the disappearance of machinery, unquote. Ambedkar wanted an industrialized India. Gandhi could have ruled independent India had he chosen to for as long as he wanted. Ambedkar lost an election by some margin, twice. Gandhi saw the village as India's liberator. Ambedkar called it a cesspool and a den of ignorance. Gandhi's self-confidence was buttressed by the blind devotion of his countless followers. Ambedkar's stemmed from his ability to speak his mind, stand all by himself, and appease no one. Gandhi had an army of men. Ambedkar was a one-man army. Ambedkar saw through Gandhi. Worse, the Mahatma gauged this, understood this, realized this, but like a stunned ostrich, pretended to hold fort, employing his bulwarks, his minions, who were also petrified of Ambedkar's intellect. India has forever been a land of such tragedies. The one who truly was a Mahatma fought a man pretending to be one and lost. When the Great War, the First World War that is, when the Great War ended with the disbanding of the Ottoman Empire, Gandhi persuaded the Congress to support the Khilafat movement, a violent agitation for restoration of the Islamic Caliphate, deposed by the victorious British. Before long, Gandhi pinched his nose and plunged into the murky waters of religious appeasement and terror rationalization in the wake of the ghastly anti-Hindu violence perpetrated by the Malabar Muslims or Moplas in 1921. Ambedkar, who saw Gandhi's advocacy of the Khilafat movement as a, quote, pernicious political stunt. The movement was started by the Muslims, he said. It was taken up by Mr. Gandhi with a tenacity and faith which must have surprised many Muslims themselves, unquote. Ambedkar viewed the Mopla rebellion as nothing but jihad. The Muslim agitators, he said, quote, preached the doctrine that India under the British government was Dar al-Harb. The aim was to establish the kingdom of Islam by overthrowing the British government. Knives, swords, and spears were secretly manufactured. Bands of desperados collected for an attack on the British authority. On 20th August, a severe encounter took place between the Moplas and the British forces at Pinmangbi. Roads were blocked, telegraph lines cut, and the railway destroyed at a number of places. As soon as the administration had been paralyzed, the Moplas declared the Swaraj had been established. A certain Ali Mudliar was proclaimed Raja. Khilafat flags were flown, and Arnad and Valurana were declared Khilafat kingdoms. As a rebellion against the British government, it was quite understandable. But what baffled most was the treatment accorded by the Moplas to the Hindus of Malabar. The Hindus were visited by a dire fate at the hands of the Moplas. Massacres, forcible conversions, desecration of temples, foul outrages upon women, such as ripping open pregnant women, pillage, arson, and destruction. In short, all the accompaniments of brutal and unrestrained barbarism were perpetrated freely by the Moplas upon the Hindus until such time as troops could be hurried to the task of restoring order through a difficult and extensive tract of the country. This was not a Hindu-Muslim riot. This was a massacre, unquote. These are words of not me, but Ambedkar. To Ambedkar's horror, Gandhi laid the blame squarely on the Hindus. Hindus, said the Mahatma, must find out the causes of the Mopla fanaticism. They will find that they are not without blame. They have hitherto not cared for the Moplas. The outbreak would not have taken place if the collector had consulted the religious sentiments of the Moplas, unquote. The last time you heard this in contemporary India was the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Kashmiri Hindus. They were blamed for it. Had they not been successful, had they not held all the government jobs in Kashmir, this ethnic cleansing would not have happened. The genesis is of Gandhi and talking of Mopla riots that none of us knew. That religious sentiment, as analyzed by Ambedkar, was jihad. Indeed, Muslim leaders themselves agreed with Ambedkar. Maulana Hasrat Mohani, the eulogized freedom fighter and a friend of the Mahatma, who once had coined the slogan Inqilab Zindabad, justified the massacre of Hindus by saying that this was Islamic jihad, and that according to the rules of jihad, those who help the enemy become enemies themselves. Shockingly, Gandhi was conciliatory towards the Maulana. Quote, there is no greater nationalist nor a greater lover of Hindu-Muslim unity than the Maulana, unquote. Even if one side is firm in doing its dharma, said Gandhi, there will be no enmity between the two. So it is more necessary for a Hindu to love the Mopla and the Muslim more when the latter is likely to injure him or has already injured him. Why should a single Hindu have run away on account of the Mopla's atrocities? Unquote. This was sheer lunacy. The Mahatma was beseeching the Hindus to hold their ground even as they were being hunted down and butchered in their thousands. One could quote more, much more, of this utterly reprehensible apologia from the Mahatma's playbook, were it not so tormenting. Of little comfort is the fact that the saint continued to hold such views despite condemnation by men like Ambedkar. Decades later, in 1947, while preaching to those affected by the pre-partition Hindu-Muslim violence, he said, and I quote, "Hindus should not harbor anger in their hearts against Muslims, even if the latter wanted to destroy them. Even if the Muslims want to kill us all, we should face death bravely. If they established after killing us all their rule, after killing all Hindus, we would be ushering in a new world by sacrificing our lives. None should fear death. Birth and death are inevitable for every human being. Why should we then rejoice or grieve? If we die with a smile, being killed by Muslims, we shall enter into a new life. We shall be ushering in a new India," unquote. Ambedkar was incensed at Gandhi's selectivity, more so of his stand on the Mopla massacre. Quote, "Mr. Gandhi has never called the Muslims to account even when they have been guilty of gross crimes against Hindus," unquote, said Ambedkar. Mr. Gandhi has never protested against such murders of prominent Hindus like Swami Shraddhanand, Rajpal, Nathuramal Sharma. Not only have the Muslims not condemned these outrages, but even Mr. Gandhi has never called upon the leading Muslims to condemn them. He has kept silent over them. Such an attitude can be explained only on the ground that Mr. Gandhi was anxious to preserve Hindu-Muslim unity and did not mind the murders of a few Hindus if it could be achieved by sacrificing their lives," unquote. Another incident around the same time brought to life or light the differences between Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi, underscoring further the gap that exists between objectivity and selectivity and how the latter is used to devastating effect in politics. It was the publication of a pamphlet called Rangila Rasool, written as a retaliation for Sita Ka Chinala, a book penned by a Muslim that claimed Lord Rama's wife Sita was a prostitute. Ambedkar stood for Mahashay Rajpal, the publisher of the pamphlet Rangila Rasool, who was assassinated by a Muslim fanatic Ilmuddin. This while Muhammad Ali Jinnah defended Ilmuddin in court, and none other than the so-called great poet Allama Iqbal carried Ilmuddin's coffin at the funeral. Ambedkar was outraged at what was done to Rajpal. Gandhi was outraged at what Rajpal did. Quote, "I am no defender of the author of Rangila Rasool," said Gandhi, adding that the book gave him deep pain. He called the book offensive and its author a mischief maker. He wanted the law changed. The law changed. In came the dreaded IPC 295A, calling for punishment for those who hurt religious sensibilities. And the India of the kind Ambedkar had imagined, an India proclaiming liberty and freedom of expression, called in our Hindu Vedas, changed forever for the worse. Incidentally, in this poster is written Ajmer. There's a 21-year-old engineer called Sunny Gupta. He was thrown in jail for 45 days. The news only came out after he emerged from the jail, so no one could even outrage on what has happened. And what was his crime? He was charged under the same section 295A that came into being after Gandhi outraged on Rangila Rasool. And what was his crime for which Sunny was charged? All he said was that Hindus should not visit Ajmer. That is all he said. That sentence offended religious sensibilities of the Muslims. Sunny Gupta was charged under 295A and he was thrown in jail for 45 days. His life was ruined. Do we know any of this? Do we know of these views of the Mahatma? Do we know that Ambedkar called him the prophet of a dark age, a charlatan, someone who bared his fangs? Worse, our knowledge of Mahatma Gandhi is embellished through that ridiculously selective propaganda film called Gandhi, and how every Indian almost danced in the aisles when Gandhi got Oscars. We know everything that Ambedkar said about Hinduism, don't we? But do we know anything at all that he said about Islam? I quote a few passages here, and you will realize how distorted our history has been. Quote, "Islam is a close corporation, and the distinction that it makes between Muslims and non-Muslims is a very real very positive and very alienating distinction. The Brotherhood of Islam is not the universal brotherhood of man. It is the brotherhood of Muslims for Muslims only. There is a fraternity, but its benefit is confined to those within that corporation. For those who are outside the corporation, there is nothing but contempt and enmity. These are Ambedkar's words. The second defect of Islam is that it is a system of social self-government and is incompatible with local self-government. Because the allegiance of a Muslim does not rest on his domicile in the country which is his, but on the faith to which he belongs. To the Muslim, ibi bene ibi patra, which means where it is well with me, there is my country. To a Muslim, this is unthinkable. Wherever there is the rule of Islam, there is his own country. In other words, Islam can never allow a true Muslim to adopt India as his motherland and regard a Hindu as his kith and kin. Conversion to Islam or Christianity will denationalize the depressed classes. If they go to Islam, the number of Muslims will be doubled and the danger of Muslim domination also becomes real. Take the caste system. Islam speaks of brotherhood. Everybody infers that Islam must be free from slavery and caste. Regarding slavery, nothing needs to be said. It stands abolished now by law. But while it existed, much of its support was derived from Islam and Islamic countries. But if slavery has gone, caste amongst Muslims has remained. There can thus be no manner of doubt that the Muslim society in India is afflicted by the same social evils as afflict the Hindu society. Indeed, the Muslims have all the social evils of the Hindus and something more. That something more is the compulsory system of parda for Muslim women, unquote. Why have these facts been hidden from us? This is not mere distortion. This is diabolical. This is an exercise in turning us into lambs, unsure of ourselves, unsure of who we are and what we need to do. Let me now come to the one and only Jawaharlal Nehru, given that I am from the university that bears his name. Great man. I just said it so my career is safe for the next 15 years. Now, there are so many aspects of his policies and personality that have deliberately been hidden, or worse, airbrushed in our history, that one lecture, honestly, is not enough to recount them all. Allow me to summarize him in one sentence. Jawaharlal Nehru destroyed the India of Sardar Patel and Ambedkar's dreams. Destroyed. But one aspect hurts us most and weakens us most. And it is that Nehru is projected as the paragon and the protector of liberty and free speech, even till today. Historian after historian, textbook after textbook, government after government, including non-Congress governments, they sing Nehru's praises on this count. So it is important for me to bring out in detail how he treated free speech and dissent. Let me give you a few examples. First Amendment was brought in with clauses of reasonable restrictions, incitement, disruption of public order. Majru was jailed for 1 year for calling Nehru Hitler ka chela. First democratically elected communist government in Kerala was dismissed. Stanley Wolpert's book 9 Hours to Rama was banned. The book Chandramohini was banned. Aubrey Menon's The Ramayana was banned. Campbell's The Heart of India was banned. Rosler's The Lotus and the Robot was banned. Import of any newspaper that, quote, undermined friendly relations with foreign states, unquote, was banned. Aziz Beg's Captive Kashmir was banned. Fleischler's Aisha was banned. Bertrand Russell's Unarmed Victory was banned. Robson's film 9 Hours to Rama was banned. Sardanvi's Marka-e-Somnath was banned. Robert Taylor's The Dark Urge was banned. Selling Lady Chatelier's Lover was banned. The book What Has Religion Done for Mankind was banned. Rawat Wank's Bhubat Singh was banned. Import of any, quote, obscene drawing or painting was banned. Mrinal Sen's film Neel Akshar Niche was banned. Menon's Rama Retold was banned. Tony Hagen's book Nepal was banned. The RSS's Organizer was censored, its publishers prosecuted. Film Gokul Shankar was banned. Godse's Testimony was banned. Goswami's film Runumi was banned. Historian Dharampal was jailed for criticizing Nehru post-Indochina war. Release of the 1962 war film Bhool Na Jana was blocked. President Rajendra Prasad's speech was barred from distribution. Film Jharna was banned. Draconian Press Objectionable Act was passed. Columnist Vivek was fired. His column critical of Nehru discontinued. Hindustan Times editor Durga Das was fired. His column critical of Nehru family discontinued. Congress leaders demanding Nehru's resignation was arrested and jailed. Ads to the Times of India were discontinued for speaking against government policy. Magazine Crossroads was banned. Play Nin Galne Communist Taki was banned. Its actors arrested. Hindi film songs were banned from being played on the All India radio. Congress demanded a ban on the iconic film Parasakti. Film Nastik was banned. Western pop music was banned from the AIR. People's Theatre Association was banned. Play Hariprada Master was banned. Film Ganga Jamna was blocked. Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay's play Mahesh was banned. Tagore's play Gora was banned. Balraj Sahni's play Jadoo Ki Kursi was banned. Tagore's play Visarjan was banned. Pradeep's song was deleted. 2 songs from Fir Subah Hogi were banned. Harmonium was banned from the All India radio. Film Jugnu was banned. Editor Prahlad Keshav Atre was jailed for writing a critical article. But hey, Nehru was liberal and protected freedom of expression. I don't know about you, but till I was 45, I didn't know any of these things were done by Nehru. Not one. I knew about emergency and I knew about Kissa Kursi Ka and Andhi, but I thought Nehru Chacha was our paragon of protector of freedom of speech. This is what history does, the wrong reading, airbrushing. Lastly, let me take the most contemporary example of distorted history and our refusal to see the reality for what it is. For that, I would like to have a show of hands from this wonderful audience. How many of you, please raise your hands, know who is Mehbooba Mufti? Almost all the hands have gone up. Incidentally, these chairs and Rugang sitting there reminds me of a forlorn bridegroom who's sitting on his... That's why I got up from there very hastily, because I didn't want to be sitting with him on those chairs. To come back, how many of you know Yasin Malik? Again, all the hands. How many of you know who was Melu Ram? 2. Sagar Sahi? 3. Ajaz Bund? No one. Eklavya? Not the historical, mythical Eklavya, but the 27-year-old Eklavya. Eklavya Meena? No one. Radhika Gill? Yes, 2. These are the people who were denied their basic human rights because of an Article 370 in Kashmir. For 70 years, the human rights of lakhs of Dalits, refugees, women, Gurkhas, Sikhs, homosexuals in Kashmir were ruthlessly trampled upon because of a bad law called Article 370. They were warriors, fighters, postgraduates, PhDs, doctors, but they could get a job only as a sweeper or a security guard. And no one did anything about it. None of us, we even knew about this. Why? Why shouldn't we call this generation that did nothing about this as casteist, xenophobic, bigoted, misogynist, homophobic? 600 Indian states were happy to melt into one India, but somehow Kashmiris think they are special. Why? 1.3 billion Indians are constitutionally not discriminated against, but somehow Kashmiris think they are superior. Why? And still there are those who say that removing Article 370 is wrong. They can only say this because of 2 reasons. That they think they are not equal to others, and that they think their faith makes them superior. Science destroys both these arguments. The road to normalcy in Kashmir is paved with humility and equality and a correct reading of history. Is our nation weakening on account of Kashmir? I put to you a direct consequence of not being taught the correct history. We don't know who Sagar Sahi, Melu Ram, Ejaz Bund, Eklavya Meena, Radhika Gill are. We don't know their names, but we know who Yasin Malik is. What does it tell you about our reading of our own history? To end then, history for us is either to be hidden or invented. We tell and retell what we like of it, and what we don't, we scrunch it up and slip it under the mattress like a plastic bag. For the victors, a quill to write history with. For the vanquished, the burden to peddle it. But we forget, history is not homeopathy. It does not work as a placebo when diluted. It simply disappears. We owe it to our survival to be ruthlessly honest about history. We owe it to science to make sure history doesn't disappear. Lastly, I would like to touch upon something contentious and controversial, and what this lecture would hopefully enforce. All of us here in this audience, composed thankfully overwhelmingly of the right and the non-left, know that we have fought with each other at some point of time. Indeed, it is one of the principal laments of the right that the right fights amongst itself. You must have seen that meme of the old Rishi Muni saying, "Lado, samapt kar do ek dusre ko, khoob lado." I have also used that meme many times. To be sure, those who say this immediately after having a fight. But I contend that this is good. We are all here together, aren't we? It is the left and not the right that cannot take criticism from amongst its own. The right works on Darwinian principles and fighting for supremacy of ideas. It comes naturally, a fundamental and glorious reason why there can never be a right-wing ecosystem. To build a right-wing ecosystem would be to replicate a left-wing ecosystem. Nothing could be more tragic. Ecosystems are tribes. Sooner or later, they demand their pound of flesh. Slowly, they sow ideas of brotherhood and dependence in an intellectual who has just joined them. And then begins the slide. If India is to encourage the growth of intellectualism, it must understand that ecosystems as we know them are to be discouraged. It must understand the role of a patron. You can support a musician by organizing a concert for him, but you can't ask him to perform your mediocre creation. And this is what all ecosystems do sooner or later. They turn into herds and their members into little lambs, afraid to speak their minds, fearful of the consequences, scared that the flow of cash or kind might ebb. Ecosystems conceal and guard mediocrity, then promote and help it prosper. Instead, the right and the non-left must now cultivate non-conformists and dissenters amongst its own fold. Over these past 8 years, not a day has gone by when the left, that holds a monopoly on the media narrative in India, principally through inbreeding and entrenched mediocrity and a collectivized belief in lunitomes, not a day has gone by when the left hasn't indulged in wanton propaganda, selectivism, scaremongering, Hindu-phobia, shameless hypocrisy, and the institutionalization of false equivalence. From spreading misinformation and fake news to pillorying institutions like the Supreme Court and the armed forces, nothing was left to chance. The intellectuals have turned into pretenders. And the pretenders have turned into potters. They have made sure the soft clay that gets baked ultimately into wisdom and sagacity is now the clay of untold misery and mediocrity. But it wasn't always like that. No, it wasn't. That clay is special. It is the same clay that suckled the glorious Vedas that fed us, whose richness reflected silently the greatness of its people, whose texture echoed unity in diversity, whose fragrance recalled Bankim and Bharati and Vivekananda and Ambedkar and C.V. Raman, whose blood birthed Shivaji and Subhash Chandra Bose and the great revolutionary. It is that same clay. It is that same clay that trundles down our mountains and is washed over by the sin-obliterating waters of our holy rivers. And while they wait to receive that same clay, receive it in their trembling hands at Ganga Sagar before it is lost forever in the vast oceans of apathy, while they wait, we have work to do to make sure they receive this clay and then shape it into a new India, a great India. Thank you very much.